So this is my character. Their name is Ace. They've appeared in the Q-Punk's video game Pinball Breaker, and they're going to be appearing in some future projects. I sculpted a 3D model of the character, and I commissioned a couple people to make prints of the figure. We got both a resin print and a PLA print here. Both printer types have their own strengths and weaknesses, both in regards to the end result as well as the process of actually getting the print made. Resin comes out cleaner, but it's harder to do bigger prints, and the final prints tend to be a tad more fragile. At least that's the impression I get after going through the back and forth with the printers, doing my own research, and going through the process of getting these samples commissioned. The PLA print is something I feel completely comfortable with having on my desk, while the resin ones are wrapped up in bubble wrapped and put in a box. The PLA printing was done by Lazagnut over on Instagram, and the resin was done by Oso, who makes animations on YouTube. These are my two all-time favorite fast food kids meal toys. In 2002, Wendy's had Mario toys promoting Super Mario Advance and Super Mario Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance, with one of the items just being straight up a real action figure. At a time where Mario action figures were like never made in America, finding one that sculpt was pretty accurate to his current design, as well as being incredibly durable. I mean, look at how much play this thing got. This thing feels more like a retail toy. It's really weird that no one talks about this oddity. Surprisingly, there's more discussion around the toy for a more obscure franchise, the Bionicle Happy Meal Tahunga. 6 variants released featuring different colors and masks, with every one being a little character that can throw a disc. These characters are actually incredibly important to the iconography and story for the franchise, even enough so that they were recreated with this Bionicle gift with purchase set. But aside from 2 exceptions, they were only ever released alongside a greasy burger and fries. And on the secondhand collector market, oh boy, these prices are incredibly inflated. Luckily I have them also. So actually one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time is Gorillaz, and one of my top 3 favorite albums of all time is Demon Days. In fact, I even love it so much I own the album on vinyl. So it shouldn't be surprising that for years I've been wanting to get some sort of Gorillaz figure or collectible. But sadly for the longest time they weren't making any new ones, and the ones that they did make were like $100 per band member. So when Super Plastic came along with this blind box series, it definitely caught my attention. And my brother actually got me 3 boxes for my birthday. The 3 I got were the Bonesy mascot, Murdoch, and Russell. While $15 may be a tad pricey for how small these things are, as well as also being something that you can't really exactly tell what you're getting until you open it, the quality you're getting, it's really good. In fact, I think these figures translate Jamie Hewlett's art style into 3D better than some of the CGI models that they actually use in their music videos. It's definitely something that only appeals to fans of the band, but it's not a cynical cash grab, and there was actually a lot of effort behind these things. And I actually consider buying more, honestly. One of the main things that made LEGO Bionicle stand out as a truly unique franchise was its packaging. Throughout the course of its original run, the majority of sets were released in unique packaging, usually in the form of plastic tubes. Oftentimes, the lids had some sort of interactive element, even connection points to be compatible with other LEGO elements. In the early years, these things were also contextualized within the lore, turning an eccentric storage method into something more meaningful. And regardless if it was one of these tubes or even a more standard boxed set, there's a much more striking graphic design and presentation when you compare it to the majority of toys just released in general. LEGO's always been exceptional at presenting its product, but Bionicle's mysterious and moody atmosphere is something uniquely found in its theme. And by synchronizing all aspects of the franchise to reinforce those elements as a cohesive, clear vision, the design almost like hypnotically sucks you into the franchise. I mean, enough so that it actually won design awards. So it makes me happy that LEGO acknowledged how important this element was with its gift with purchase set, when they completely abandoned it with the G2 reboot. For the Bionicle 2023 gift with purchase LEGO set, Toa is the main attraction, and my main feelings is that it's the best possible job that could be done for basically an impossible order. Like, there was no way that they were going to be able to perfectly represent Tahu without making a brand new mold for a mask piece. But working within the restrictions of using only printed pieces, the mask looks about as good as they possibly were going to get. I think the figure would look better if it had a symmetrical arm design, maybe something similar to the Bionicle Stars version of the character. However, that would also be really inaccurate to how the original set looked. As far as the build is engineered though, it's really good and solid except for the arms, which are held onto the socket joint by only 2 studs. Sometimes when moving the shoulder ball joint around and you twist it at the wrong angle, the arm pops off. A minor issue, but when the rest of the playability is 10 out of 10 as far as the joints go, it definitely stands out as a little bit of an issue. I definitely am happy I went through the effort of getting this thing, and it's a decent proof of concept for a potential future for Bionicle. However, there are some adjustments that need to be addressed before saying that this is the perfect approach for a 3rd iteration.
Takua the Chronicler was the original point of view character for the first 3 years of Bionicle. While the Toei heroes were of mythical status, most accurately compared to demigods, Takua was an everyman, with an adventurous spirit and curiosity. Oddly enough, Takua did not actually have a proper set form until the third year of Bionicle, and the set reflects how he looked in the web games and web cartoons for the first 2 years. Because this version of Takua is so strongly associated with simplified 2D illustrations, rather than detailed 3-dimensional sets or 3D models, the simplifications taken when making him a brick build don't feel as jarring as compared to Tahu. Also, translating his mask to a printed rectangle with a little bit of a curve works well when you compare it to his original mask, which was much more geometric compared to many of the other Kanohi. In my book, this system-built Takua is basically 10 out of 10, and he's the main highlight of the gift with purchase Bionicle set. While in recent years there have been hints and nods, references to the original Bionicle iconography, the actual lore for the original Bionicle is something that's rarely acknowledged officially by LEGO since the series cancellation. So as silly as it sounds, this simple assortment of pieces is actually a huge treat for die-hard fans. Originally, the village elders would use these stones when telling the other villagers about their origins. In the first few years, it was closer to a religious creation myth. However, as the narrative progressed, you started learning the true history behind the events that truly took place. These stones reflect the duality concept between good and evil within the world. The stack of 1x1 plates represents Makuta, the main antagonist, the source of evil within the Bionicle universe. And the egg piece represents Ma'anui, who's basically the main god that all the protagonists are loyal to. There's ways to make this build maybe closer to the original source material, but that would require custom printing of parts.
The Bionicle gift with purchase set is a cool little tribute item, but what about the first Bionicle tribute set released? No, we're not talking about the 90th anniversary little mini Tahu. We're talking about the Bionicle Stars. When Bionicle was originally canceled the first time, they released a wave of 6 throwback sets, covering the entire history of Bionicle. It was really divisive at the time, because it was a huge step down in complexity to what the main sets people were expecting, as well as also the fact that a lot of people were angry that the Bionicle series was ending. However, as time has gone by, I have really warmed up to these designs, specifically how this Tahu looks when you give him all the golden armor pieces that you collect by buying the other 6 sets. Looks really cool and dynamic, and the other figures do look great, aside from Skrull. He's kind of bad. You know, I think the biggest oddity of Tahu Stars is his mask, actually. It's a recreation of an element created back in 2001, remade in 2010, in order to make it compatible with a new piece. However, instead of just changing the connector on it, the entire dimensions of the mask were incredibly altered. It's made to hug the head that it was made for. However, by doing so, it does screw up compatibility with other Bionicle head types, so it greatly cripples the versatility that this mask could have potentially had. However, this mask does put into precedent that LEGO will recreate old elements and update them if needed. So while we may never see the original mask or this weird narrow version released in a future set, an entirely brand new mold may come out. However, for now, the best we're working with is just a print on a tile. The Bionicle Stars quote-unquote Paraka was always a favorite of mine because I loved how they were able to recreate the spines from the original Paraka and put it onto such a small build. But objectively speaking, it's not really that great of a set. Like, when you take away the wow factor of this really cool piece made miniature, what else are you left with? A blue Agori that really needs some shoes. Despite that, I can't lie, he's actually my second favorite of all the Bionicle Stars, right behind Rakshi. I know I may sound like a complete psychopath, but I actually prefer the Bionicle Stars version of the Rakshi over the original set version. Sure, the original sets were at a more intimidating scale, towering over the Toa Nuva, but I do appreciate how compact and full the body that was used for the Bionicle Stars Rakshi looks in comparison. Also, I find this yellow Rakshi spine with the head and the Karada container being one piece looking a lot more eloquent than the original set Rakshi. And on top of all that, I like the little claw toes a little bit better than the shoe-like feet. It feels weird saying all this, especially given the fact that I consider the original Rakshi sets as like one of the goats. For goodness sakes, if you just buy bulks of Bionicle parts, you just clearly know, man, people owned way too many of these things. I feel like one of the biggest missed opportunities with the Bionicle Stars was not making Takanuva be the quote-unquote golden Bionicle. I get that it makes more sense to do Tahu because he's like the flagship Optimus Prime of the franchise, and it harkens back to the original golden masks from the first year. But it really bothers me that 2 out of the 3 Takanuva sets that were released, only one of them had gold. When Takanuva was first introduced, it felt very emphasized that the elemental color of light was actually gold, not white. But then as Bionicle went on, and I get that there's canon story reasons of him losing some of his light power, then getting it back, yada yada yada, fusing with Makuta. But at a certain point, they just needed to bring the gold back. And it would have been perfect to do it at the very end, especially given that Takua was more of the protagonist in the first few years of Bionicle. From my new online game to the first movie, Takua was the main dude. In the Bionicle fan community, it's common practice to create a Bionicle character that represents your avatar. When I joined back in the early 2010s, I built the original version of the Larnuu character, and then around 2015, I created this redesign, which has remained mostly the same, only featuring some minor modifications since then. While the green Kapaka mask, or the Kaku if you want to get really Bionicle nerdy about it, originally released back in 2001, I didn't get this until around 2012. When I went down to New Orleans, I went to the French Quarter and found a deck of Bionicle trading cards. It came with a couple masks, and this was one of them. My personal favorite element from the build is the usage of the Barak cowl feet being used to create a tapering slope for the torso as well as connection points for the arms. Ironically enough, I don't actually feature this version of my character nearly enough on the internet, and the more recognizable iteration of this character is actually a build not built by myself at all, but rather this miniaturized version built by Callan LOF that features in his videos. Larnuu Creations, Gakko, and Rio. I made these two Bionicle builds back when I was like, I don't know, 11, 12, so they may not be the best builds in the world. However, what makes them interesting is what they were used for. In my teenage years, I created a Gakko and Rio stop motion web series. With 18 episodes and 2 seasons, I often credit it to being the thing that made me familiar with filmmaking in general, which actually allowed me to succeed when I went to college for it. Episodes feature original scripts, voice acting, and even in some cases music. In recent years, I revived the characters into wholly original concepts. By the time of this video, these incarnations have featured into original shorts, as well as being playable characters in the CubePunks game Pinball Breaker, which got featured on the front page of Newgrounds.com. Wild things to spawn from just 2 pieces of plastic made by some kid, especially when you consider Gakko was originally only made to be a pilot for a vehicle that doesn't even exist anymore, and Rio was just some random tribal warrior design. I don't really collect figures made by NECA, and here's why. While I do think the painting and sculpting is insane for a lot of these figures, I honestly feel like they would be better off if they just made statues rather than doing action figures. The problem with this manufacturer's figures is that they tend to use plastic that's not particularly flexible, like it doesn't have any give to it, which has resulted in joints breaking for me by just moving them. This Team Fortress 2 Pyro is a perfect example. I absolutely adored the game, and by all counts and measures, I should probably have a complete set of these things, but just because I was so put off by the leg breaking from just moving it, I never bought another character. On top of that, the articulation range is like really limited. You're really not going to get any dynamic poses. The characters are just going to be mostly standing there. So really, if you take the word action figure, NECA excels in the figure part, but they really come short with the action part. And for the few figures I actually have purchased, I just put them on the shelf and never touch them. I could be potentially swayed from this opinion in the future, but for the time being, this is how I feel. These are the best Street Fighter action figures ever made. Let me explain. When trying to find the best balance between sculpt, articulation, scale, and stylistic appeal, very few can rival SH Figuarts by Tamashii Nations. While not every single one of their releases are perfect, when a figure is done right, it's hard to argue that this is not the definitive 6-inch version of that character, or at least that iteration of the character. And with how much articulation is provided with these fighters, without having to sacrifice aesthetics, it's safe to say that most of these qualify as being done right. Now, there's a couple figures with some wonky elements, such as Ryu's face, or Cammy's, you know. But in the case of Sakura and Chun-Li, they're virtually flawless. Stylistically, my favorite Street Fighter games are the Alpha series and Street Fighter 3, but sadly, most other figures resemble Street Fighter 2, 4, 5, the upcoming 6, and garbage. Luckily, we got that anime style here. Sadly, we haven't gotten any new ones since 2020, but this is actually one of the few lines of figures that I will actually track down on the secondhand market, because
figure scale is really important to me, because when you get something too big, it becomes just really cumbersome to me. Like, I feel like 6 inches is like the perfect scale range. Anything smaller and you start running into sculpt quality issues. Or in the case of an action figure, hard to get good posability out of them. It's not impossible to find these, but it's just much harder. But I don't want anything bigger because it becomes kind of too hard to display. Like, the amount of real estate they hog up is just way too much for me. And then when the bigger the thing gets, the more cumbersome it is to pose them. And given that a lot of action figures end up becoming glorified fidget toys for me while I'm thinking, how easy something is to move is a little bit more important to me than most. On top of this, I don't like admitting it, but sometimes my stuff gets knocked
knocked over. Sometimes it even falls off the table. And aside from plastic flexibility and if or if not landed on carpet, a huge determining factor on if the thing is going to break is how heavy the thing itself is. If something's bigger, typically it's denser, and if it's denser, you're going to run into issues of something breaking under its own weight easier. Also, larger things tend to be overpriced. This is one of my favorite figures of all time because it avoids my number one action figure pet peeve. When making an action figure, you're trying to figure out how to get as many points of articulation on the figure without having to compromise the aesthetics and sculpt. A lot of this comes down to finding clever places to hide the joints. A common problem spot is the abdominal area. The solution you find with most male characters is making the cut between the two pieces along the rib cage, which is more true to life. However, for figures of women, the cut is often hidden directly beneath another element, which while it does hide the division, when you twist a joint, things start looking off. But given Sakura's design has a hanging t-shirt and an exposed midriff, you get a much more natural looking range of torso twists than you're going to get with practically any other action figure, even other figures in the same line. This can't always be done when adapting a pre-existing design, but if you're designing something original made to be a figure, it is something worth considering. How intimidating are model kits for figure collectors? For years I've collected import action figures that have all come pre-painted and pre-assembled. However, recently I came across Kotobukiya's Dark Magician Girl. I thought it was a really cool looking figure, but then found out it was actually a model kit, one that's very much similar to Gundam's Gunpla. And while I did personally enjoy building her, and the difficulty was comparable to just building a Lego, I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. The learning curve of how to clip pieces off the parts rack properly is the biggest challenge of making one of these. And if this is your first kit, you're going to run across a situation where you took too much off. Now personally, I can rationalize these imperfections as part of the sentimentality. A fond reminder of the first time I ever built one of these, and how much of an enjoyably relaxing experience it was. But if you don't have that mindset and you're going to be thinking, damn it, there goes my $40, either start off with something cheap and get good, or don't do it at all. But if you have an interest in joint engineering, then I would actually say a model kit is a must-have. It's educational, and you get a waifu out of it. I have been a Sonic fan for more than 15 years, and out of all the Sonic the Hedgehog action figure lines that have ever been made, I would say the Jakks Pacific 4-inch Sonic figures have been the best. Prior to this point, the only figure series that has ever come close to being comparable to this were the Jazzwares 3-inch figures. However, due to their smaller scale, sculpts constantly being compromised by how many joints there were, and honestly not being the most durable things in the world, as figures, they are honestly not my favorite. And all those gripes I just listed have been alleviated with the current 4-inch figures being made. However, the thing that made the Jazzwares 3 inches so goated was that it was the most comprehensive figure line that we ever had as fans for the series. However, Jakks Pacific has been releasing a large variety of figures, including some that have never had ones prior. So it's on its way to dethrone Jazzwares in that regard as well. While not every single Jakks figure is perfect, for $10 figures, some of these are like insane when you consider these are like $10 figures. Like how the fuck is Big the Cat that cheap? For the Jakks Pacific Sonic the Hedgehog figures, some characters look better in the 3-inch scale while others look better in the 4-inch scale. With some mild exceptions, the general rule of thumb is that if the character comes from the modern series of video games, they look better in the 4-inch scale. However, if they're the classic version of themselves, you should probably get the 3-inch version. The reason for this is that canonically, the classic characters are quite noticeably shorter in scale compared to the modern counterparts. But if you look at the classic 4-inch figures, they're like massive. And for the modern characters, the sculpts tend to take a huge hit when they get shrunk down to 3 inches. While there is an argument where the 3-inch modern Sonic figure scales well against 6-inch action figures, the 4-inch line is actually perfect if you're trying to go for a Super Smash Bros. Collection, because in that game, short characters oftentimes get a size increase. The one classic character I say you must get in 4-inch scale though is Dr. Robotnik. Not only is it my favorite sculpt out of any of the Jakks Sonic figures, the height difference is perfect for 3-inch little animals. I consider this Sonic figure a must-have for any fan of the series. While it may not be perfect, when you consider its weight division, it's an incredibly good offer. Typically when you run across $10 toys, you run into a lot of problems with sculpt accuracy, range of articulation, or durability. Luckily, you don't have to worry about any of those issues with the Sonic figure. The one thing I would say you'd have to be concerned with this figure, and the rest of the line as well, is paint application. When you're buying it, make sure you do so in person in a store so you can make sure that none of the paint goes, anywhere wonky. I've seen a lot of white from the eyes overextending onto the muzzle, and in the case of my Sonic figure, some of the orange on its lip has gotten a little bit too far down. Speaking of which, the orange lips are really the only main thing I dislike about this figure, but I prefer this variant over the teeth variant. What I absolutely adore and is rare for a figure of this character is the fact that there's actually a little bit of an ankle pivot so he can actually stand up by leaning forward a little bit, counteracting the weight from his spines. I consider Shadow the Hedgehog as one of the best figures in the Jakks specific 4-inch figure line. Easily in the top 3, above Sonic actually. While I do think that the Sonic figure gets a lot of things right, all of that applies to Shadow as well, but then there's a couple additional things that Shadow has that Sonic doesn't. The first thing is that Shadow is really the only 4-inch Sonic figure that actually uses proper gold paint on the gold elements of his design. Every other character, including Sonic, uses just a flat yellow color, which makes it look really toy-like, which granted they are toys, but the line tries to hit this happy in-between of being satisfying to collectors as well as also kids who want to play with them. And the little extra pop from the actual gold makes it feel more like a collector item. And the second thing Shadow has going in his favor is more so just his core design color choice. With Sonic's blue, you can see some of like the seam lines and kind of the manufacturing roughness, but Shadow's black covers up most of that. Aside from paint messiness, which varies per figure, the only thing I dislike on the Shadow is the red line on his mouth. It would have looked better if it was just black. The Jakks specific Knuckles the Echidna figure could stand to use symmetrical arms. For a character who's defined by his boxing gloves, it feels really wrong that only one of the hands is really made for punching. It would have also been nice if the red part of his head used a softer and more flexible plastic, because with the way it currently is, the dreads do limit articulation. This is not a unique problem for this figure, it's a common problem for Knuckles regardless, but it would be nice to see a figure implement that fix. For positives, however, I do like the proportions on the sculpt a lot, and despite it being a Jakks figure with an open mouth, for some reason it doesn't bother me nearly as much on here as it does on, like, say, Amy. The seam lines are also a lot cleaner on Knuckles than a large portion of the other Jakks 4-inch figures. Overall, he's a solid figure that needs 2 adjustments before I recommend him as a must-have. I hate to say it, but if there's a Jakks specific Sonic figure that needs to be overhauled and re-released, it would be the Tails figure. For starters, you have like a lot of design issues with the figure itself. His mouth is at this uncanny position where I can't really tell if it's either just kind of slightly open but not really, or if he just has really pronounced red lips. The spinner tail variant can't properly spin around without hitting the back of his head, and for the one with the tails at a neutral position, there's no ball joint being able to tilt it downwards. It's just hanging there, and it makes it hard to pose him without having him fall over. But regardless of variant, there is one common problem spot that you have to watch out for with this figure, and it's around the nose ridge where the white of the muzzle meets the yellow of the head. These are 2 separate pieces of plastic that then get connected together during the manufacturing. However, on the yellow part of the head, you oftentimes find warping in between the eyes. You can see this on my tails with the spinning tails. I would definitively not recommend this figure, but if you do unfortunately buy them, do so at a retailer so you can pick out the best one. They haven't made a whole lot of action figures for the modern Amy Rose design, and while this is the most recent option and better than a lot of the previous choices, it's not a perfect figure. For starters, I think the design would benefit greatly from having more of a neutral resting face expression. Between the toothless smile, minimized hammer, and awkward connection point for the leg, if you're not careful with your posing, you can make her look like just like a big baby with a rattle. And last thing I need on my shelf is a diaper fur. One way to alleviate this problem greatly is have her not hold her hammer, which I would actually recommend this for a further reason as well. I actually have 2 of these figures, one that never holds her hammer and one that's always holding her hammer. And the one that's always holding her hammer, the paint from the handle has been completely stripped off, staining her glove. If you can find a figure for the original price, it's not a terrible purchase, but if you buy it for any level of markup, you're going to be paying too much. If you're a huge fan of the series or character, I'd be like, yeah, go ahead and pick it up. But if you're only more casually into Sonic, there's other things I'd sooner recommend. To cut to the chase, I would recommend this Metal Sonic figure if you do like Metal Sonic. However, there are 2 things that you should probably be aware of before purchasing him. Number 1 is his elbow articulation. His right arm bends forward and backwards while his left arm only bends side to side. And there's no form of swivel, so you're kind of stuck with this weird asymmetry. And if you're somebody who cares about Metal Sonic having actual metallic colors rather than being a matte gray, the Jakks specific gold release only adds that finishing to the red and the blue. For me personally, the thing that bothers me more is the asymmetrical elbows, especially given the fact that there's actually a swivel joint in the knee articulation. And whenever they do a re-release of this figure, I really hope that they fix that. I also just remembered back when I got this thing, the connection between the elbow and the forearm wasn't pushed in all the way. It was an easy fix, just boil some hot water in the microwave, soak the figure into hot water a little bit, the plastic just gets a little looser from the heat, so then you can push the joints in a little better. So yeah, maybe something to be a little wary of before buying. E123 Omega, one of my all-time favorite Sonic characters, and that's probably because he looks a lot like a Bionicle from Lego. And it's completely psycho to me that like Sonic Heroes is like over 20 years old at this point, and it took until now for him to get a figure. And what's even weirder feeling is that his figure is also the best release within his line. Like, this is a $10 figure. A $10 figure with like every single point of articulation you would want for this character. A $10 figure with an exceptionally accurate sculpt. A $10 figure with an insanely clean paint job. Like, add some swappable hands and a metallic finish, and this could easily be like a $35, $40 figure. Like, if you just like robot action figures, not even just Sonic, robot action figures, buy this figure. It's an absolute steal. Funny enough, there's actually two variants of this figure because this one was the original first run, which actually had an error. The gray around Omega's eyes are actually supposed to be black. But regardless if you got the accurate or inaccurate version, this figure still looks great, despite being Queen of the Furries. Rouge the Bat, oddly enough, has only had one figure released prior to this one, and that was for a Sonic X toy line back in the 2000s. There were other figures planned, but they got canceled. So for a character who's a mainstay for the franchise, for better or for worse, she's been long overdue for a new figure. And for this installment in the Jakks Pacific 4-inch figure line, she's not a bad one, but definitely has quirks. Oddly enough, Rouge is one of the only animal characters to have both elbows and knees, but she can't really use them because of her cuffs. She's also the only character with articulation points cut directly through her gloves and her boots. Combine this with also her head kind of being smaller compared to the other ones. She's good, but she almost feels like she's from a completely different figure line. Also, her wings are articulated on a hinge joint, and they tend to pop out, but you can pop them back in easy. It's not a big deal, but it's a little annoying. Look, there's only two types of people who are going to buy this thing, and all I'm going to say is my excuse is diehard Sonic fan.
Ugh, my beautiful furry queen.
Do you want to share a few pics later?
Espio the Chameleon is a character that has a lot of similarities to Sonic himself. And at first glance, you might be thinking, oh yeah, this is basically the same as the Sonic Jakks Pacific 4-inch figure. However, there's a couple weird deviations with the Espio figure that are worth highlighting. One that I actually do like is the choice of black paint for his mouth, rather than the orange used for Sonic. But then the feet chose a weird solution to the whole entire being back heavy problem. Sonic has a little bit of ankle articulation so you can make him lean forward, while Espio they decided to just make his feet really long. And the way Espio's wrist articulation is done is only at the glove, while Sonic's cuff also rotated with his hand. I mean, it's all serviceable, however it's kind of oddly inconsistent from the rest of the line, and I prefer the prior established standard. But even with that, I still would recommend the figure if you are a fan of the character. Let's put it this way, if Sonic was an A, Espio would be a B. It's not bad, but A's and A pluses also do still exist within the line. Thank goodness the Vector the Crocodile figure can actually close his mouth, and there's actually a point of articulation there, because when I saw all of the product photos and how he's positioned in the box, he has his mouth open and he looks a little doofy. But close his mouth, really the only thing that aesthetically is an issue is maybe the eyes looking a little wall-eyed in some positions. But the sculpt, range of articulation, and size of this figure is really generous for a $10 release. The weird thing with the Jakks 4-inch scale Sonic figures, the general rule of thumb is that the larger the figure gets, the higher quality and better value the figure is. But if a character is skewing on kind of the smaller side, talking Tails and modern Robotnik here, the quality tends to dip down. So far, the three big figures for the line have been Vector, Omega, and Big the Cat. And out of all those three, which I would recommend, I would actually say Vector is my least favorite. It's not so phenomenal that I would recommend them to non-fans, while almost paradoxically, I consider him a must-have for a Sonic fan. At the very least, the ones who played Sonic Heroes.
Despite the fact that this figure is a retooling of the 4-inch Sonic the Hedgehog figure from Jakks Pacific, unfortunately, one of the key factors that made me like the original standard version of this character did not translate over to his super form. Due to the yellow plastic being significantly softer than the dark blue, the knee joints don't provide enough resistance for Supersonic to be able to stand upright. Even when leaning forward quite a bit, the back weight is too much and the knees cave in, bending over and making the figure fall over. So basically the review on Supersonic is the same as Standard Sonic, except subtract one positive and add a negative. If you want to see my review on Standard Sonic and many other figures in the same line, check out all of them on my profile. In fact, I just dropped a compilation video on my YouTube channel. NECA Sonic, also referred to as Robo Sonic and Silver Sonic, was one of the two main final bosses you faced in the second Sonic the Hedgehog video game. It's nice that Jakks Pacific with their 4-inch figure line actually acknowledged one of the many variants of robot Sonics that exist in the series, outside of just, Metal Sonic. And I also love how there's a proper silver reflectiveness used on this figure. Metallic paint definitely helps these things, and they don't come on every single one of these. However, I do have to say, this figure feels a little short compared to the rest of the line. In fact, it feels much more in scale with the 3-inch figures than it does with the 4-inch ones. However, if the scale doesn't bother you, I do highly recommend it. It might not look like it, but there's actually a really solid range of articulation on this thing. Robot characters in this line tend to get a little bit more articulation than organic ones, and this is a pretty good example of it. It would have been nice if the wheels could have rotated a little bit, but whatever. If you're a fan of the classic games, definitely pick up this one. The 4-inch Jakks Pacific Dr. Eggman figure has been around for a while. They released it at around the start of the line, and it's been getting re-releases recently. However, I do think that this figure needs a major overhaul, in fact a complete overhaul, before it's re-released again. For starters, the figure is not in scale with the rest of the line. Like Sonic and Friends should be up to his chest maximum. This Dr. Eggman is definitely better scaled for the 3-inch line. However, scale is not the only problem. I have not found a single one of these figures that has its nose painted properly. Sometimes there's too much pink paint blobbing it around near the mustache. However, most of the time, it's not enough, and the tips of the nose and especially under the nose are left completely bare. There's also an attempt at layering a hair texture on his mustache, however it's completely messed up, especially when you compare how perfect the classic counterpart did its mustache texture. Look, until they do a complete overhaul on this guy, I can't recommend him, even if you like Sonic as much as I do. I try not to be too negative on these things, but I'm kind of absent on positives. Look, you don't even need to watch this whole video. I'm going to tell you straight up right here, right now, the Jakks Pacific 4-inch classic Robotnik is a must-have. It is fantastic. For an articulated figure of this character, I can't think of a more perfect execution without getting to, more expensive price ranges. I absolutely adore the mustache, from its texture to also having the perfect level of flexibility. He has a complete range of articulation: elbows, knees, shoulder, hip, ankle swivel, wrists, head swivel, it's all there. He might not be the most posable guy in the world, but he's also incredibly circular. There's no way the Fat Man could pull off a Spider-Man pose. And the sculpt, this thing just looks like it just popped straight out of the classic Japanese artwork. There's really not much else I can say. It's just simple, executed perfectly. I can't think of really any better way to translate this guy into 3D. If you're a toy collector and even just kind of a Sonic fan, this is a must-have. It's a fantastic deal. A really high level of effort and quality went into the Egg Robo figure in the 4-inch Jakks Pacific Sonic the Hedgehog figure line, with seamlessly hiding articulation in the mechanical joints of the original design, as well as providing finer details that oftentimes many figures in the same line don't go for. The last word you could ever possibly describe this figure as is lazy. The best example of this is that there's actually custom printing at the bottom of the feet, not sculpted texture, but a fully colored decal. It's also worth highlighting that out of all the characters with unique props, Egg Robo has by far the largest with his gun. From personal bias, Egg Robo has never really been my favorite Sonic character. So due to that, this figure is just inherently not as exciting to me as some of the others. However, from an objective level, if you were to put all the figures on a tier list, he would be in the top tier. I personally consider Robo, Classic Robotnik, and Omega as the best made figures in the entire line. If you're a fan of robot characters, I really do strongly recommend this one. If you have even a mild interest, just buy him right now, dude. Sonic, Shadow, and Silver all kind of have like a hedgehog trio going on. And for the Jakks Sonic figures, when you compared them side by side, Silver is the odd man out a little bit. His head has noticeably different proportion. I feel like it's most noticeable around the muzzle area. That figure also feels a little bit more hard compared to Sonic and Shadow. Sonic and Shadow's noses are actually pretty flexible, and while there is some flexibility with Silver's, it's significantly less. Despite these inconsistencies though, he doesn't feel like he's significantly lower in quality than the rest. He meets the standard that this line establishes. There's nothing really particularly exceptional about him, but there's nothing offensive. If you like Silver, pick him up, but there's nothing crazy happening here that makes him a must-have. The Jakks Pacific 4-inch Big the Cat figure is pretty crazy in terms of size for a $10 figure. I've heard some people wishing that he came with either his pet frog or maybe even a fishing pole, which would be nice, but you have to take into account. For most figure lines, they typically don't do a flat rate for all the characters within the scale range. Usually it fluctuates a bit for the individual character size. Big the Cat should have either been $12 or $15, not $10. So the fact that he comes that cheap and comes out actually higher quality than most of the other animal characters, I'm not going to complain that he didn't come with his extra props. series. It would be a cool special edition for the figure down the road, but I'm not going to complain that, they're absent in this original release for this figure. I really think this figure comes with a fantastic range of articulation. The sculpt is on point, and nothing about it feels low quality. However, I will say that the feet is actually a slightly different color than the rest of his body. So a minor issue that prevents me from saying this is flawless, but not something I consider a deal breaker. But anyway, yeah, if feet don't weird you out, I consider him a must-have for a Sonic fan, and a really strong recommendation for people who are more casually into the series.